All right. Good evening, everyone. I hope you are doing well. Thank you for being here, even though it's evening around dinner time. But yeah, really excited to have you here. My name is Shulong, and on behalf of the Science Policy Exchange Society, I want to present to you today a very special lecture workshop to show you more and tell you more about academic and public engagement. Please welcome our guests, Kavvya and Christian.
Hi everyone, pleasure to be here and thank you for hosting us. My name is Kavvya Neeba and I work as a Policy Engagement Network Coordinator for the Centre for Science and Policy, or CSaP as we call it. So in my role, I work with researchers across the university, helping them think about the policy impact of their research. So that involves supporting them in identifying the right stakeholders, signposting them to different policy engagement opportunities, and talking and delivering these sort of training sessions and introductory sessions for researchers. And in a lot of my travels, I hear early career researchers tell me how policy is a black box, how this is an intimidating space, how it is a confusing space, and they don't know where to start. So this talk is designed to be very practical. It is designed to help you take the first step in policy engagement if you haven't done so already, and if you are already along that journey, this is hopefully this will help you take the next step and take you further. So with that, I will start with a very quick introduction about Centre for Science and Policy. Anybody who has tuned into the news in the last few days, in the last few years, knows that we live in a world that is constantly changing. It is in rapid flux, which means that we're dealing with technology disruption, climate change, global instability, problems that are of wicked in nature, and this means there's more pressure on public services, there's more pressure on policymakers to deliver the right decisions under very, very tight timelines and with limited knowledge and information. So with that context in mind, CSaP was introduced about in 2009? Yeah, in 2009 with the aim of bringing policy and academia together. So as a center, our aim is to improve public policy through the effective uptake of knowledge, research expertise, and research evidence. So we do this through a spectrum of different activities, which I'll tell you a little bit more later. But our core mission is connecting the academic expertise, the research expertise that goes on in the university and beyond to the relevant policymakers in the UK government, in international organizations, and we also work with local and regional partners as well. And our approach is a bit unique in the sense that we don't operate in a research push model. Rather, we start with the questions of policymakers. So by identifying what the priorities and questions of policymakers are, and then we bring those questions to Cambridge and identify interdisciplinary expertise for them to meet, to learn different perspectives, to learn different knowledge. And with that context in mind, the talk today is structured in 3 different parts. In the first section, my colleague Christian will take you through the policy landscape, and you will learn how complex it is and how crowded the policy landscape that we operate in is. We'll look at a little bit more about the science policy interface, what is academic policy engagement, and why researchers like you should care about academic policy engagement. And in the next section, I will unpack what engagement means, so that we will be looking at what are some of the practical things, what are some of the practical pathways that you can pursue to engage with policy, along with some concrete examples of that. And then in the final section, I will tell you a little bit more about CSaP, the services that we offer, and what opportunities exist with CSaP and how we can help you in your policy engagement journey. And with that, I'll hand it over to Christian.
Amazing, thank you. And very nice to meet all of you. I've met some of you before, haven't met most of you, so I look forward to getting to know you over the course of this afternoon as well. And before I begin, I'm curious, who here feels well-versed in public policy? Raise your hand if you feel like you do. No one. I mean, I guess that's why we're here, to learn a little bit more about it. That's good. Who here wants to maybe have a career in public policy or in government? 1, 2, 3, 5. Yeah, about half the room. Good, good. Okay, good. That gives me a little bit of context, and that's a little bit of context as to what we're going to be talking about this afternoon. So, thank you. So we're faced with this challenge, this question, which is, how do we as researchers navigate a really complicated, constantly changing, and multifaceted policy landscape? And I love this chart from the Institute for Government, which is a think tank that does research and trainings for how the UK government works. And I really encourage you, if this is something that you're interested in exploring more, to take a look at the Institute for Government website. They have internships, jobs, and events that I encourage you to take a look at. But I really love this chart because it shows the real complexity of what goes into the policy-making process. And the way that they characterize it is in these 3 different tranches. We have influencers, we have decision makers, and then we have implementers. Some of you will be really familiar with a range of these. For example, on the influencer side, so the people who will provide thinking to what should the policy process be, what are the ways that we should think about the challenges and the questions that are facing us today. You have things like civil society, think tanks, political parties, academia and research, you all. But you also have media and lobby groups and other bodies which might not be as commonly thought about as trying to ideate and come up with what are some of the ideas that are feeding into the policy-making process. Now, it's all well and good to have people who try and influence the policy debate. You then need people to take decisions on what those policies are. And in the UK, we have a really interesting government structure where we have a very centralized government that has been increasingly devolving its powers in the past 20, 30 years. And so you have a central government which still sets, compared to other countries certainly, a very large portion of spending decisions, of social policy decisions, of employment policy decisions, education policy decisions, and so forth. Science policy, very importantly. But increasingly, you also have these other tiers of government, which are increasingly gaining more resources, more formal power, and more legitimacy to also be able to take decisions that impact the people who live within their jurisdictions. And so this could be devolved administrations like the Scottish government, for example. This rise of metropolitan mayors, Manchester is a really quintessential example of that here in the UK, and then of course local government, so your city council here in Cambridge. But what happens quite often in the policy process is that you have people who come up with terrific ideas, you have decision makers who make decently well thought through decisions, or we hope so at least, but then you get to this 3rd stage. Who's actually going to implement this? Who is actually going to translate those decisions into actions? And this is an area that I think is quite often missed, and for those of you who are really curious of working in policy, I always think it's good to have a chance to work in one of these different implementing bodies because it allows you to see the challenges, the barriers, and so forth that come to actually translating policy into practice. This is not only local authorities and executive agencies, individuals like yourself, but also importantly, businesses, which especially in some fields play a really important role in actually implementing some policy, voluntary and community organizations, charities. So it's a really complicated landscape and an important landscape as well of who is implementing these decisions. So one of the ways that we can think about this, or one of the ways that we can sort of see this graph, which I really like, is, well, this is really complicated. And in that complexity comes both a challenge, how do we navigate this, but also an opportunity, because it's easier for you to situate yourself within one of these spaces. In the 1990s, there was a school of thought that began to emerge in the UK, and this was implemented a bit in the new Labour government that took power after 1997, that looked at this idea of evidence-based policy. And you hear this term thrown around quite a bit. And what evidence-based policy tries to do as a conceptual framework is that it tries to bring together the different pieces of expertise, information, and influence which go into shaping a policy area or go into shaping policy thought. So that's political knowledge or political views and decisions, that's practical knowledge and practical views and decisions, but it's of course also, incredibly importantly, scientific knowledge. And these are the three pillars which really make up this piece about evidence-based policy. And what we're going to be focusing on for the remainder of the talk today is how you can fit into that third tranche, scientific knowledge. Now, it would be really nice if we could just go into a room, present some research, have a talk with senior politicians, senior policymakers, and through those conversations and through providing your research, that would solve all the issues. That would allow you to implement policy. But of course, it's much more complicated than that. There's a number of barriers which go into impeding the evidence-informed policy process. One really important one, which is I think especially true in academia, is that we have very different timescales. Just for another show of hands, how many of you are PhD students in this room? So a sizable minority. For those of you who are PhD students, you probably, if you haven't already, you will certainly be at some point soon, be part of a grant writing process and trying to think about how do you develop a big research grant. And usually, especially for some of these really big, really innovative, really exciting research projects, these are multi-year, 3, 5, 7-year projects. And at the end of that project, when it's done, whoa, that's amazing. You've produced some really tangible, really impactful work. But a policymaker quite often can't wait 3, 5, 7 years for you to complete your research. They need decisions or information within a week or a month or within a year. And so you have this timescale mismatch, which I think a lot of academics really struggle to grapple with. A second really important one, and this is for those of you who might have done a little bit of engaging with policy before, or for those of you who are consumers of policy news or political news, you'll notice, and I think this is very true in academia, that there's different languages that you're speaking as an academic versus a policymaker. As an academic, we tend to use a lot of jargon, we tend to use a lot of terminology, which for us in our given field makes complete sense and is sort of a lingua franca across the field that allows us to operate effectively. But that terminology is not understood necessarily, certainly, by policymakers. And so trying to translate between these different languages and trying to understand what those differences are is really pivotal. A third barrier is different incentives. And this ties into the different timescales point a little bit. Of course, if you're a politician, your aim at some level at least is to get reelected. That's a core incentive. If you're a policymaker, you have people above you, politicians, permanent secretaries who are the highest level of civil servant, who are saying, this is the decision or this is the direction that we need to go and that we need to take. And you as a policymaker then have to abide by whatever those top level decisions, goals, missions may be. You as an academic have very different incentives. You're not trying to conform to a certain policy or a certain agenda or a certain aim. You're trying to pursue your research and to pursue it in a way that allows you to better understand the questions that you're exploring. And these are two very different ways of viewing a problem and of viewing a question. And what we're going to try and do through some of the things that we'll talk about in a bit is to try and bridge some of those gaps. Kavvya introduced this a little bit, and we'll come back to this quite a bit, so I'm not going to labor on this point, but the way that we at the Center for Science and Policy try and think of ourselves as operating within this thing called the science-policy interface. And I like this chart as well, although I have a bit of a critique against the chart. Because the chart is saying here that scientists can help inform policymakers, policymakers engage with scientists, but of course it goes both ways. One of the things that I'll come to and spend a little bit more time on in a moment is that the work that policymakers do as well is an opportunity for you to incorporate that into your research, and I'll come back to that point as well. So these arrows can go in both ways. But there's two different ways that you can think about yourself if you are someone who wants to sit in this science policy interface. One way is to serve as what we would term an honest broker. This is what we try and position ourselves up at CSaP. And what that means fundamentally is that we're not trying to advance a given position. We're not trying to advocate for something. But rather what we're trying to do is we're trying to connect ideas and allow policymakers to better understand what is the academic evidence and expertise that exists, and what are, and for you as academics, to allow you to better understand how can I contribute to the policymaking process. There's a second way of thinking about this science policy interface, which is as an advocate. And as an advocate, as I think the name implies clearly, is here you're trying to put forward a position, you're trying to really advocate for something. And I think for those of you in here who might want to work in this landscape in the future, think about, what do I feel most comfortable being? What do I want to be? What is the type of impact that I want to have? Both of these two roles are really important, and trying to figure out where do my skills and my interests best lie, that is one thing that I think is really pivotal. So at CSaP, and in this field of science policy, the term that we use to characterize how we go about actually addressing those incentive gaps and those timescale gaps, etc., is policy engagement. And policy engagement is has a couple of different criteria, and especially when we think about successful policy engagement. And so one of the things that I do in my job at the Center for Science and Policy is I go to meet with a lot of academics and try and think through with them in their grant applications, how can you build in activities that allow you to influence the policy process? And I think someone's trying to get in, but it's locked out. But I think you're on the way. Good. And there's a couple of criteria that we always try to emphasize and hammer home when speaking with those academics. One is that you obviously want to be sharing evidence and expertise. Two, you want it to be a two-way dialogue. You don't want to be talking at a policymaker. You want to be having a conversation with the policymaker, which feeds into point number three, which is that this process of policy engagement, and Kavvya will really emphasize this when she goes through how you can get engaged and get involved, is that this is a multi-stage process. You can't, unless you're exceptionally lucky, you can't one day flip a switch and have achieved the policy engagement aims that you have. This is something that takes a long period of time. So making sure that this is a dialogue rather than a one-way conversation is really important. And this multi-stage process and dialogue, this really feeds into these two core components of the work that we do, and if I think of this whole field, which is that this is fundamentally about building relationships, trusted relationships between you as an academic, as an expert, and policymakers. That is the way that you can achieve successful policy engagement. Why might you want to do this? So sometimes I meet academics who are super successful in their field. Some of you might know people like this. Super successful in their field, and they're not necessarily zeroed in just on that area, but they are not too keen on thinking about, well, what's in this for me? Why should I engage with this process? Other academics, of course, are much more interested and willing to engage, but quite often we'll meet some academics who just want to really focus on their research. And so what are some of the arguments that we make and some of the things that we hear from other researchers who are active in policy engagement about why this process is important? One, it can make your research matter. So if you're trying to make sure that your research goes beyond the confines of this university, of academia, of the journals that you're publishing in, there's different ways that you can make that happen. It could be through public engagement, it could be through commercialization, which quite often happens in some of the technical fields here at this university. But another pillar of this is through trying to impact the policy process. The second point, I alluded to this earlier, but just to emphasize this a little bit more, what we see in really big research bids today, and I think this will only continue to accelerate as a trend, is that what funders are looking for, and this is a tip for those of you who might be applying for your own bids or contributing to your own bids in the future, is that funders are looking for you to embed the stakeholders who you're trying to engage with and impact with into the research itself. And so what does this mean? This means you might not only organize a workshop which convenes some of the key people in your field to discuss the questions that you're exploring, but you're then making sure that the outcomes of that workshop and that the people who participated in that workshop feed back into the policy, into the research that you're doing. And there's different ways you can do that. So one really important way, and I think this will only continue to become more important, is it can improve your research itself. And this is maybe a little more true for some disciplines than for other disciplines, of course, but I think as a general rule, I do think it is important. Quite a few people who we meet are, especially those who are more early in their career, are exploring the possibility of working in government in the future, either on a full-time basis as a civil servant or on a part-time basis, providing expertise to an advisory board or providing expertise to a government department. And by having this process of policy engagement, by speaking with policymakers, by understanding the language and the incentives that they have, that allows you to gain vital skills to be able to hold those roles or to be able to contribute to that type of advisory body. I emphasized this point of research funding already, so I'm not going to spend any more time on that. And the final point here is, and this kind of ties into what I already mentioned a little bit, but we have a hyper-competitive academic landscape today. For those of you who are PhD students who want to stay in academia, you probably have already had conversations with your supervisors or other people in your faculty or in your discipline about just how challenging it is to secure an academic post in most disciplines, or probably all disciplines today. And there's different ways that you can raise your research profile, that you can strengthen yourself as a candidate and to make yourself stand out. There's different ways, and policy isn't the only one. But I do think policy impact and policy engagement is one way of demonstrating to funders, to departments, to universities, hey, I'm not just a regular researcher. I'm a researcher who's going to come into your department and into your university and have impact. And I think that is really important for those of you who are looking to do that move. Just to wrap up before I hand back over to Kavvya, there's a lot of different stakeholders which feed into the policy process. And for different disciplines, for different questions, there will be different entities that you will want to target and want to look at. And this will very much also depend a little bit on your preferences. Some of you who might want to go about this process might feel more comfortable engaging with think tanks and interest groups, whereas others might feel more comfortable engaging with businesses or NGOs. This will depend a little bit on your personal preferences. This will depend on the field that you're in. But I think what's really important, and what we really want to emphasize coming out of today, is that quite often when we talk about policy, especially when we talk about national policy, it is natural and normal to gravitate to the UK national government or the national government of whatever country you come from. But what we really want to emphasize is that that is only one piece of a very big puzzle and a very complex puzzle. And what we're going to try and do now is to highlight a few ways that you can situate yourself within this complexity and find opportunities to engage. I guess maybe before I hand back to Kavvya, if there's any questions. We'll also have time at the end for any questions that you may have then. Great.
Great. Thank you.
Do you want me to click?
I can do that.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you. Great. So from Christian, you've heard about the policy landscape, some of the key stakeholders, and why it is important for early career researchers like yourself to be thinking about engaging with policy and why it matters for your research, why it matters for your career in the long term. And what I really want to do is now really unpack engagement and think about how can you practically engage with policy. And before I delve deeper into some of the pathways and mechanisms that exist to engage with policy, one thing that I really want to emphasize is that there is no one correct way to engage with policy. There is no formalized pathway, there is no rule book that says if you do A, B, and C, then you're engaging with policy, you've made an impact, and you've become this big policy expert. Policy engagement is not linear. It's not a tidy process that goes from you did your research, you published a paper, a policymaker read it, and then boom, there's an impact. It is inherently a very messy process, so you must think of policy engagement and routes to policy engagement as a set of possibilities that you can curate depending on your needs, your research, your priorities. And with that, again, I really have to stress that there is no one correct way to do this, but it is useful to think about policy engagement in broadly three categories, and one of them is responding to policy needs. So this is a very structured way to engage with policy, because policymakers are always in need of research and data and research evidence. So there's always calls for evidence and consultations from the government departments that come out, which is a low barrier but high impact pathway where you can get started. And in engaging with this sort of mechanism and engaging with policy, you don't really need to have a big track record of engagement. You don't need to have many publications under your belt to respond to a call for evidence or respond to a consultation from a department. So it's something that you can do today. You can do as a master's student. You can do as a postgraduate, as a PhD student, if you have something relevant to contribute to the discussion and to the policy. Now, if we were to look at some of the concrete mechanisms under this pathway, the one is, as I mentioned, government consultations, which are formalized calls for evidence, and this can mostly be in a way that the government has a policy drafted and they are opening it out to public and expert consultations. So this is for the government to understand what is feasible, what is not feasible, what are some of the unintended consequences of this draft policy that they are looking to implement. And here's an example of that, which is an open consultation that is receiving evidence contributions at the moment from the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, DEFRA. So you see a lot of these consultations on the government website. So you can go have a keyword search, find one that aligns to the research that you're interested in, and if you have something to contribute, there are detailed guidance on how you can submit your views and your perspectives. Another way is to responding to calls for evidence. Much like the consultations from government departments, they also have calls for evidence. The difference between a consultation and a call for evidence is that call for evidence can be very exploratory, information-seeking exercises to inform a policy, whereas a consultation might be one where there is already a draft policy in place and they're looking for further views on that. So Parliament is a really, really interesting place because they have something called the select committees that you might have come across. Now, select committees are cross-party groups made of MPs. It could be from House of Lords, House of Commons. There are also joint select committees. And select committees are categorized by subject areas. So they have inquiries where they ask for the views of experts from academics, from civil society organizations on particular questions. Here is an example of a call for evidence from the Education Committee, which is currently open for evidence submission, which is on the use of artificial intelligence and edtech in education. So each inquiry will come with a set of questions that the government or parliament is seeking research evidence on, and you will see detailed guidance on how you can submit evidence to a select committee inquiry. Yeah?
Just one really useful thing to know about select committee inquiries is that assuming your evidence is selected, which unless it's sort of completely left field from the topic, it will be you will be cited in the report that is produced, and this is a great opportunity to be cited.
Yeah. Which is the example that you're seeing on screen. This is a closed inquiry from the food diet on food diet and obesity, and you can see Cambridge researchers who submitted evidence cited on the website. And this is an excellent way to showcase your research impact. Having these citations under your belt can be really useful for your future grants, future PhD applications, or if you're pursuing a career in policy. Another impact that can come from submitting evidence to a select committee is that if your evidence is extremely relevant and credible and the committee is interested in knowing more, they will invite you to Parliament to give something called the oral evidence. So that means you're cross-examined by some of the MPs, some of the parliamentarians on that specific topic. Moving on. Another way you can respond to policy needs is by keeping track or contributing to post notes or post briefs. So POST stands for Parliamentary Office for Science and Technology. One thing to know about the whole field of academic policy engagement is that it is riddled with acronyms. First 3 months of this job was just spent learning acronyms. But coming back to POST is an impartial knowledge exchange unit for Parliament. It aims to summarize cutting-edge research to MPs, to House of Lords, House of Commons peers, so they can then use that information and knowledge to scrutinize the work of government to feed into ongoing policy development. Here is a post note that is now open for submissions, which is on lifelong learning and skills in the UK. Again, if you submit submissions to the post note, you are cited. There's a citation link there which can be used for your grant applications. It also has high relevance in your rep submissions, which I'm sure a lot of senior academics in the university are already thinking on. So beyond these post notes and post briefs, post also thinks about rapid evidence assessments, where they collaborate with academic partners in summarizing knowledge for parliamentarians on a topic that's currently in discussion. And they also have a lot of forward-thinking work called the horizon scanning. So there might be calls where a committee is saying, we want to plan for the next 5 years. What do you think are the 10 priority areas that we should prioritize? And that's something that you could feed into. So coming back to some of the mechanisms that we talked about, beyond responding to calls for evidence and consultations and post notes, another way you can engage with policy is by building relationships and networks. And Christian really hammered home this point about how important relationships are and how they are very vital to engaging with policy and creating an impact for your research. And if there's one thing that you take away from today's talk, it is that policy engagement is highly relational. It is not just about your research, it is about who you know and who knows you. So there is, beyond the transactional and short-term exchanges through calls for evidence, consultations and such, building long-term relationships will really help you establish yourself as a credible expert, and policy opportunities will then follow you, because trust is the strongest currency in this world. And if you have that sort of trust built with policymakers, and when they need evidence, when they need advice on a particular topic, they would think of you and opportunities will open up for you. How do you go about building those networks and relationships in the first place? A good, easy way, especially for early career researchers, is to apply for placements, take part in fellowship opportunities with the government. There are a lot of these opportunities that different arm's length bodies, different departments, other government agencies operate for, mostly for PhD and early career students, but there's also relevant opportunities for undergraduate and postgraduate students as well. A really good example is the UKRI Policy Internship Scheme. There is a fellowship scheme with POST, which is currently open for submissions. There's another one with the Open Innovation Team, and another really good example is the DEFRA R&D Fellowship. What these fellowship opportunities offer you is the very exciting chance to embed yourself in a policy environment, see how policymakers operate, and see what sort of transferable skills that you can take from being a researcher, from being an academic, and how you can translate that to a policy environment. So, and you would find that there's a lot more there's a lot more value in transferable skills than actually being a topic expert. Another way to build long-term relationships and networks is being part of science advisory councils. And I recognize that science advisory councils are mostly targeted towards mid-career and senior academics, but still this is a relevant unit within departments that deals with scientific evidence and making sure decision makers in government, in parliament, have scientific evidence that is useful for them. So there are science advisory councils in every department, in every arm's length body, and within each department or an arm's length body there might be multiple advisory committees focusing on specific topics, and now that accepts early career researchers and PhD students as well. So if you see an opportunity where an advisory committee is recruiting, go for it. It's a really, really valuable opportunity to build relationships, and that's something that you can do along with your studies, along with your academic career, because it's extremely low commitment, but the payoff is really, really high. Another really, really good opportunity to engage with Parliament and to sort of build these informal relationships is to engage with something called the APPGs, or all-party parliamentary groups. So all-party parliamentary groups are informal, cross-party groups. I think there are around 800 of them at the...
I think the PDF online is 800 pages long, but it's many hundreds.
Yes. So you would find APPGs on different countries, so there might be an APPG on Germany, there's one on Belgium, there's one on India. There are APPGs on subject groups. An example is, here is an example of an APPG on aviation. When you look through the registry of APPGs, what you discover is what are they dealing with, what is the topic area they're dealing with, who are the members of those APPGs, and you can see the contact information is listed as well. Again, a really good opportunity. If you have research relevant to and what an APPG is talking about, write to them. Ask to join their informal public meetings. And while there might be an opportunity for you to directly contribute to policy at the time, those connections, those networks will become really, really handy later on as you progress through your career. Coming back to the question that we started with, how do you engage with policy? So we've looked at sort of transactional, structured ways of responding to policy evidence. We've looked at building long-term relationships and networks, which is thinking forward on how can you establish yourself as a credible policy expert, how can you create these sort of opportunities for yourself in the future. Another really good way to engage with policy is to align your research with policy priorities. So this could be, and this is something that you can start doing now as a postgraduate student, as a PhD student, is thinking, what is the policy relevance of the work that I'm doing? What is the policy relevance of the topic that I'm interested in? Or what are the current policy debates in the field that I'm interested in? Think about it and start integrating those questions, those debates into your research very early on. And because when your research is policy informed from the very beginning, you will find that it is so much easier to engage with policy once you have something relevant to say, once you have something credible to say. And this could be thinking about grant applications, thinking about who your stakeholders are, thinking about co-producing knowledge with some of the policy stakeholders. And that doesn't have to be a chief scientific advisor or cabinet office or the Department for Education. It could be working with your regional or local policymakers. What are some of the questions, policy questions that my counselor is dealing with? Talk to them and see if your research could help them answer some of the questions they're dealing with. A really, really, really good resource to start thinking about how can you align your research with policy is to look at something called ARIs, or Areas of Research Interest. Now, areas of research interest are a series of research questions that is published by each government department. So they are regularly updated, and these are, the government departments are saying these are the questions that we are struggling with. These are the questions that we want you researchers to answer. Here is an example from the Welsh government, and you can see the question there as well, just for me to read. asking on evidence on informal displacement. And as you can see from this website, there's very clear definition of the question. There's a clear ask, and you've already given information on, do you have any evidence or data on this, and then contact us. You could just really drop them an email, and there are specific dedicated teams and professionals working in each department in each government who are looking at ARIs, and that would be a fantastic way to start. There is an ARI database. I can send all the links through after the talk as well. You can have a keyword search, see what stakeholders are looking at policy questions that might be relevant to your research. Another thing with ARIs is that ARIs are really useful to be cited in grant applications. Sometimes there are specific pots of money held with Research Council. If you're doing something relevant to an ARI, they'll give you extra sort of money to do that work. So it's always good to keep ARIs in the back of your mind and use that as a sort of a lighthouse when you're dealing with the complexity of the policy landscape. Another really good way is to start thinking about and start framing your research, whatever you want to say, relevant to policymakers. And this could be writing blogs, think pieces in things like the conversation. It could be writing for the LSE blog. It could be writing for the Institute for Government's blogs. It could be sending something to the Guardian that, believe it or not, policymakers, civil servants routinely read these blogs, and if that is something interesting to them, they might get in contact with you. They might invite you to do a presentation. A really interesting example that I want to highlight is that I worked with a PhD student who was based at the Judge actually last year, and her research looked at how MPs perceive support for climate policies, and she was really switched on, and she wrote these blogs, these articles, and she did workshops with the help of CSaP as well. And it was picked by The Guardian. The Guardian published an article citing her research. Following the publication of the Guardian article, she's now invited by 2 APPGs, I think, and she's presenting in Parliament later this month to MPs. And this is a student who's not even completed her PhD yet. So that's sort of the impact that these little things can have. Before I move on to CSaP services and how CSaP can help you, is there any urgent questions that I need to take? Brilliant. Great. Just wanted to tell you a little bit more about some of the flagship CSaP programs. Like I mentioned in the beginning, CSaP's aim is to improve public policy making and to connect academia and policy together. And we do this through a program called the Policy Fellowship Program, which is basically our bread and butter. So it is a 2-year professional development program designed for senior civil servants, mainly in the UK government, but we do get policy fellows from international multilateral institutions as well as from local and regional authorities. When these policy fellows are elected for their fellowship for 2 years, and they're elected every term, so we elect around 11 to 15 policy fellows every term, they come with a set of questions that are most relevant to the portfolio that they're dealing with in government or in their policy organization. And what we do, what our team does, is connect relevant researchers to these policy fellows for one-on-one meetings. So that could be just a meeting of an hour, maybe 60 minutes or so, but it can be really useful, one, in building those networks and relationships that I talked about, and 2, responding to the questions, the needs of the policymaker, and slowly building yourself to as a credible expert. And This is not just for established academics. We routinely invite PhD students to meet with some of the senior policy fellows as well. You can, if you're interested in meeting some of our policy fellows, you can drop us an email and we can create a profile for you on our website, so that if there is a policy fellow with a question that matches to your research expertise, we can drop you an email and see if you're happy to talk to them for an hour. And you can see on the screen some of our policy fellows, our most recent policy fellows at the top, from Department for Education, from the UK Health Security Agency. We also get an occasional policy fellow from another country. So that's Rebecca is from the Royal Danish Embassy. And at the bottom you can see some of our Policy Leaders Fellows. Policy Leaders Fellowship is a variation of the existing Policy Fellowship program, but targeted for the senior most people in civil service. So this includes permanent secretaries, chief scientific advisor, and director generals. The only difference between the fellowship program is that these people tend to be more busy, so we only organize meetings for them once every term, which is again happening later this month. Another core CSaP offering is policy workshops. Now, policy workshops are extremely demand-led, so this can be commissioned by a government department, or it can be commissioned through a researcher's budget. And these are tried and tested methods where we bring together around 16 to 24 stakeholders, and this could be from academia, this could be from industry, from civil society, and from policy, to really drill deeper into a policy question and to explore some of the different perspectives, some of the different challenges. These are extremely curated and obviously invites only and under Chatham House rule. So at the end of every policy workshop, there's a summary note, some of which you will find on our website published, some of which might not be published if the topic they're dealing with is confidential. And policy workshops and being part of policy workshops can also be a really good way to create further impact and create that sort of opportunities for yourself going ahead. And some of this should look like, you come to a policy workshop, you meet some of the relevant stakeholders in academia or in policy, and then they might extend an invitation for you to join one of their councils. They might extend an invitation to co-author a paper with them. So it can take many forms, but what we have found is that these sort of networks really, really pay off in the longer term. Very briefly, tell you about the Policy Engagement Network. This is a cross-university network that I manage. Postgraduates, PhD students, professional services staff, senior academics, everybody is welcome to join the network. What we do with the network is we send out e-bulletins every other week, every 2 weeks, which is a compilation of all policy engagement opportunities. So in an e-bulletin, you would find some of the calls for evidence that's asking for submissions at the moment. There might be policy fellowships that are open for applications at the moment, and so on. Another really good opportunity for early career researchers to engage with policy is the seed funding initiative that we established around 2 years ago, called the Policy Innovation Fund. So Policy Innovation Fund will award up to £10,000 per application for you to work in collaboration with a policy partner of your choosing. So to go back to the example of the PhD student from the judge, she had applied for a Policy Innovation Fund to CSaP in collaboration with some of her policy partners and her supervisor, which then enabled her to run a workshop for MPs at the Royal Society in London. So we are opening for applications again in the Easter term, so likely that would be first, even before Easter term, I think. So likely keep your eyes peeled for a notification from CSaP, so that might be end of this month or early April. And if you don't have a policy partner, but you have a relevant policy idea, you can reach out to us. We do offer consultations, and we try to match you with some of our policy fellows as well. We offer extensive support throughout the project duration for the Policy Innovation Fund. We offer PhD students 3-month policy internships to come work with us. We take around 2 policy interns, 2 to 3 policy interns every term, and this is not just for Cambridge PhD students. PhD students across the UK and beyond can apply to work with CSaP, and applications are accepted on a rolling basis, and it is reviewed regularly. We also offer grant support, so if you're thinking about writing a future bid and you want somebody to take a look over it and give you some advice on how to integrate policy aspect to it, please do reach out. Beyond grant support, we also work with researchers to offer advisory support on a one-to-one basis, whether it be for stakeholder mapping, whether it might be for connecting them with some of the policy stakeholders in our network. So we always happy to have a chat, and if there's anything policy related that you think CSaP can help with, please do reach out to us. And before concluding, I also wanted to highlight a few of our upcoming seminars. So we have one coming on the 5th of March on democracy and climate in troubled times. This is part of the Christ Kennel lecture series. So there's another lecture later this month as well. We have our annual Cleveland lecture, which is on the 29th of April. This is delivered by one of our policy leaders fellow and former chief scientific advisor at the Home Office, Professor Jennifer Rubin. Now this is accepting registrations as well. In conjunction with the CSaP annual Cleveland lecture, on the morning of 30th, we are organizing a breakfast meet and greet with Professor Jennifer Rubin, which is also now, we are inviting expressions of interest. If you are interested in chatting with Jennifer Rubin and connecting with some other PhD students who might have done stints in policy, who you're, if you're looking to start a career in public policy, and if you're interested in joining the group, please do drop me an email after this, and I can share the form for expressions of interest. Now that brings me to the last and concluding slide, and if there's one thing that I want you to take away from this, is that policy engagement is very much, it creates very much of a snowball effect. It's about starting early and being consistent and building those relationships so that you have opportunities coming to your doorstep in the future. And this is something that Christian and I always like to use, because it was something our founding director said, that CSaP is all about engineering serendipity, because a lot of these policy engagement opportunities happen ad hoc. It depends on who you know. So we're very much about democratizing that sort of opportunities and widening the circle. So it doesn't matter if you don't have a big network in Whitehall. It doesn't matter if you don't have a perfect policy engagement idea, but if you're interested in contributing to policy, do reach out to us and do start early. And with that, I will conclude. Thank you, and you have our contact details there. Happy to take any questions.